Before there were names, before there were memories, there was only the earth, vast and whispering beneath a young sun. The continents were not yet settled in the shapes we know. Mountains were still climbing from the deep. Oceans stretched like mirrors of molten silver, breathing in the warmth of dawn and exhaling clouds into the pale sky. And somewhere, far inland, where rivers carved the bones of the land and forests murmured with creatures long forgotten, the first of us, or something close to us, walked quietly through the mist. They did not know they were human. They did not know there would one day be words for love or fear or loss. But in their bones, a quiet spark was growing. The same spark that one day would build fires, carve stories, and lift eyes toward the stars. That spark, so fragile, so bright, was almost lost. Nearly 900,000 years ago, the Earth entered one of its long and merciless winters. Ice thickened across the poles, seas retreated, and the air grew thin and dry. Across continents, the great herds moved southward, chasing warmth that kept slipping further away. And in that slow, grinding cold, something happened. A silence fell across the lineage that would become us. For reasons hidden in time's deep layers, drought, famine, volcanic ash, or simply the turning of climate, nearly all our ancestors vanished. From countless thousands, perhaps millions, only a few hundred survived. Imagine that. The entire tapestry of humanity, all our laughter and longing narrowed to a single fragile thread. Every person alive today, every thought, every heartbeat traces back to that thread, to a handful of beings who endured when almost all others were gone. But tonight we are not here to mourn them. We are here to remember them, to drift through their world as if through a dream, guided by the slow pulse of deep time. The story of that near extinction is written not in words but in dust and bone. It is encoded in the quiet spirals of our DNA, a faint echo from the past, whispering of a bottleneck so narrow that life itself could have slipped away. Scientists call it a genetic bottleneck, a time when the diversity of our ancient species collapsed almost entirely. But beneath that technical phrase lies something deeper, something almost sacred. The moment the future of humanity balanced on the edge of nothingness. It was an age long before Homo sapiens, long before art or firelight songs, or tools of stone shaped by human hands. Our ancestors then were more ancient still. Perhaps Homo heidelbergensis, perhaps the shadow of something earlier. A species straddling the line between ape and man. They walked upright, but carried the memories of trees in their bones. They watched the stars, but did not yet know to wonder. And yet they were alive in every sense that matters. They felt the cold seep into their shelters. They felt hunger gnawing through the night. They held their young close to their chests and waited for dawn. They dreamed perhaps of warmth, of sunlight glinting on rivers, of fruit heavy on branches, of voices that would one day be ours. We think of deep time as empty, but it was never empty. It was full of breath and silence, of beginnings and endings looping endlessly. Long before the first word was spoken, the earth itself told stories. In the rise and fall of sea levels, in the slow dance of ice and thaw, in the extinction and rebirth of countless species. We are one verse in that endless song. 900,000 years ago, the melody almost stopped. For perhaps 100,000 years, the human line hung by a thread so thin that even a single volcanic eruption or drought might have erased it forever. But the thread held. Somewhere, hidden in the shelter of a river valley or along the warm edge of a retreating sea, a few small groups endured. Imagine them, huddled around small fires, wrapped in furs, their breath visible in the cold air. They spoke no words, but they had language of another kind. The language of eyes meeting in the dark, of hands sharing food, of hearts beating close together against the cold. In that silence, they became our ancestors. From them, all of us descend. The poets, the dreamers, the wanderers, the lovers, the lonely. And yet, for hundreds of thousands of years, their story lay buried, forgotten beneath the soil. Only now, through the patient work of scientists and the secrets held in our genes, have we begun to hear their faint voices again. They tell us of struggle and resilience, of survival against impossible odds. But they also tell us of beauty, of how life, no matter how fragile, refuses to vanish. The earth has always tested life. She turns her seasons like pages, each age a lesson written in stone and dust. Sometimes her lessons are gentle, a shift of riverbeds, a new bloom of forest. Sometimes they are harsh, ice creeping over continents, or fire spilling from the mountain's heart. Through it all, life adapts, endures, and begins again. And so tonight, as you lie beneath the same sky that once watched those early beings, you might feel a kinship that transcends time. Their world is gone, but their breath is in you. Their endurance became your heartbeat. Their hope, though they could not name it, became the long story of humankind. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the weight of centuries drift away. Imagine the earth as it was then, vast, untamed, and sacred in its silence. Feel the cool breath of ancient winds moving across your skin. Hear the rustle of unseen creatures in the darkness. Somewhere out there, one of your ancestors is lifting their face toward a pale moon, wondering, though they do not yet know the word, what will become of them. The stars above them were the same stars above you. The constellations had no names, but their light was familiar. And perhaps in that glow the future was already whispering that one day, from the few who survived, a species would rise to paint, to dream, to gaze back through time and tell their story. This is that story. It is a story of loss and endurance, of the near silence of our kind. It begins in ice and shadow and ends in the warmth of survival. It is the story of how nearly all of humanity was erased, and how, from almost nothing, we began again. So now, let the mind slow, let the world grow quiet. The tale begins not in noise but in stillness, in the hush between heartbeats, in the breath of an ancient dawn. Long before fire, before memory, before the name human was ever spoken, there was life, and that life, against all odds, chose to endure. Long before the world took the shape we know, the planet turned under skies of quiet fire. The continents were still shifting, their bones creaking under the pressure of deep time. Africa, vast and sunlit, was the cradle of our beginnings, though no one then could have known it. It was a land of golden grasslands and shadowed forests, of volcanic plateaus, breathing smoke into the dawn. It is here, in this ancient continent, that the story of our near extinction first begins. The clues are buried deep, not in monuments or ruins, but in the codes of our own blood. Modern science, with its quiet patience and gentle light, has read those codes, and through them we have seen a ghost of the past emerge. About 900,000 years ago, something happened to our ancestors. Their numbers plummeted from perhaps tens of thousands to only a few hundred. For nearly 100 millennia, humanity teetered on the edge of oblivion. It was a bottleneck so severe that, in all the sprawling immensity of Earth, The entire human lineage might have fit into a single village. But how do we know this? Not through fossils alone. Though bones, worn smooth by the soil, still whisper their stories. We know it through the living record that each of us carries. Inside every cell within the winding spiral of DNA lies a map of time, a memory of every struggle, every dawn, every narrow escape. When scientists traced those patterns backward, they found the echo of a collapse so deep that it nearly erased us. The data, gleaned from genomes of people around the world, tell of a time when genetic diversity almost vanished, a sign that the population of early humans had shrunk to near nothing. The discovery, made through the new science of paleogenetics, suggested that only about 1,000 breeding individuals remained. They were the bridge between what came before and all that would come after. But the Earth, in that age, was not kind. It was the Middle Pleistocene, a time when the planet's climate lurched between warmth and ice, rhythmically, unpredictably. Glaciers expanded and retreated like breathing lungs. Rain patterns shifted, rivers dried, forests thinned into dusty plains. And for those fragile beings who walked upright, who hunted and gathered and raised their young beneath uncertain skies, survival became an act of grace. Imagine it, the air thin and cool, the horizon pale with dust, the days marked not by clocks or calendars, but by the slow movement of herds and the waning of the moon. They followed the tracks of elephants, the shadows of great cats, the distant sound of flowing water. They carried simple tool, flakes of stone sharp as memory, and the instinct to move, always to move, toward food, toward shelter, toward the promise of life. In that world, danger was constant, but it was quiet danger, the kind that came not from violence, but from hunger, from cold, from drought. The earth itself was testing them, shaping them as a sculptor shapes clay. Every challenge carved a new adaptation, sharper eyes, steadier hands, minds capable of remembering where water once flowed, where fruit once grew. And slowly within those small bands of survivors, something remarkable began to stir. They were no longer simply creatures of instinct. They began to imagine. Perhaps it was in the way they gazed into the glow of lightning over the horizon, wondering what fire was. Perhaps it was in the way they buried their dead, a gesture of mystery, of love, of memory. Perhaps it was in the way they taught their young not just to follow, but to learn. The fossils that remain from that age, jawbones, fragments of skulls, tools scattered through ancient soil, tell us of beings much like us, yet not quite. They may have been Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestor shared by both Neanderthals and modern humans. Broad-faced, strong-limbed, with minds beginning to open toward awareness. They hunted with wooden spears, gathered roots and fruits, and made shelters from branches and stone. They lived not in cities, but in clans, small groups bound by necessity and the beginnings of affection. Each group was a world unto itself, a handful of hearts keeping watch against the vastness. They moved through Africa's valleys, along the green belts of the Great Rift, where volcanic soil fed forests and rivers, carved deep scars through stone. They crossed plains that would one day cradle the Serengeti, where elephants and antelope roamed under skies blazing with stars. Far to the north in Eurasia, others of their kind followed game into colder lands. They learned to wrap themselves in hides to build shelters against the wind. The earth was drawing lines of destiny. Some would become the ancestors of Neanderthals, others of Denisovans, and a few, a fragile few, the ancestors of us all. It was during this long wandering that the great crisis began. The climate shifted more violently than before. A prolonged glacial period swept over the planet. Rains failed, and grasslands withered. In Africa, lakes that had once been vast mirrors of sky turned to salt pans. Animals migrated or died, and with them went the lifeblood of human survival. In this drought, our ancestors dwindled. Food grew scarce, groups scattered, separated by deserts and mountains. For thousands of years, silence reigned where laughter once had been. And yet, in that silence, life clung on. Perhaps a few small bands found refuge in sheltered valleys, where underground springs still whispered beneath the sand. Perhaps some followed the coastlines, feeding on shellfish and roots. Others may have hidden in the highlands of East Africa, where clouds still kissed the earth and the air was gentle. Wherever they went, they carried with them the most precious inheritance of all: endurance. It is strange to think how close it came, how easily this entire story, the story of humankind, might have ended before it began. If those few hundreds had not survived, there would have been no cities, no art, no music, no dreams of flight. The earth would have gone on without us, beautiful and silent, her winds unbroken by the echo of human thought. But they did survive. And from that narrow thread of existence, life began once more to weave its endless tapestry. Thousands of centuries later, scientists would uncover the clues. They would study fossils found in Ethiopia and South Africa, in caves and riverbeds turned to stone. They would compare them piece by piece against the ancient code written in our DNA. And slowly they would see the pattern: a near erasure followed by rebirth. The discovery, published in the early 21st century, sent quiet ripples through the world of science. It was as if a lost chapter of our history had been opened, a chapter no one remembered, but that shaped all who came after. It revealed that humanity's story was not one of steady progress, but of fragile endurance, that before we learned to conquer, we learned to survive. Imagine now one of those survivors, a woman sitting by a small fire, her child sleeping beside her. The stars above her are sharp and cold. She hums softly, perhaps a rhythm known only to her kind. Her face is lit by the glow of flame, her eyes deep with thought she cannot name. In that moment, the whole future of our species rests in her heartbeat. She does not know it. She only knows the warmth of her child's skin, the sound of night creatures, the scent of smoke and earth, that firelight, that breath, that memory. They are all still with us. Every cell, every heartbeat carries a trace of her world. Through her, through the nameless few who lived when almost all perished, we inherit not just life, but resilience. So the story of discovery is not only the story of science, it is the story of listening, of hearing the faint whispers left by time, and realizing that we are the echo. When we look into ancient fossils or sequences of genes, we are not gazing at strangers. We are looking into mirrors older than language. They show us who we were and how close we came to being nothing at all. The origins of our survival lie not in strength or dominance, but in connection, in the way our ancestors stayed together, shared what little they had, and found warmth in one another. It was not the strongest who survived that frozen age, but the most compassionate. It was not conquest that saved them, but care. And perhaps that is why, even now, across the endless stretch of years, we are moved by the simple act of kindness. It is memory, old as bone, the echo of those who held each other close in the dark and waited for the light to return. And the light did return. The ice would one day melt, the rains would come again, the earth would turn, as she always does, toward renewal. But before that, there would be ages of trial, of evolution and adaptation, of loss and transformation. Our kind would change. We would grow in number, in thought, in spirit. And slowly from the ashes of near extinction, the story of humankind would rise anew. When the long chill of the earth began to soften, the survivors, those quiet, persistent keepers of life, emerged once more into the changing light. The glaciers retreated inch by inch, leaving behind valleys scoured by time, new rivers glittering under the sun. For tens of thousands of years, the world had been a test of endurance. Now at last, the earth exhaled, and life began to breathe again. From the few who had endured came many. The small bands of early humans, scattered like seeds across the ancient landscape, began to move outward. They followed the warming winds, the return of animals, the renewal of forests and plains. And with each passing generation, they changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly. The way mountains erode or rivers bend. They learned the shapes of new lands. They learned to listen to the rhythm of the rains, to the calls of birds that meant water nearby, to the quiet murmur of roots beneath their feet. They learned the scent of distance and the taste of survival. And as the world healed from its long winter, so too did they. Their bodies were strong, shaped by scarcity and time. Their minds, too, were changing, growing more intricate, more attuned to pattern and cause. They began to see meaning in movement, the path of herds, the pulse of seasons, the gathering of clouds before the storm. They began to remember. Memory was the first step toward civilization. Long before writing, before speech as we know it, memory was the bridge between moments, the quiet thread that tied yesterday to today. A mother would remember where the river last ran deep. A hunter would remember the call of a bird that meant nearby prey. A child would remember the warmth of fire and seek it again when cold returned. And so, slowly, a species of remembering beings began to take shape. They were not yet Homo sapiens, but something near. Ancestors of the line that would become us. They were the dreamers of the Middle Pleistocene, the forgotten ones who rebuilt the world. The valleys of East Africa, once dry and silent, grew green again. Rivers swelled and herds returned. Across the open plains, great elephants and antelopes moved in slow, graceful patterns. Predators prowled in the tall grass, but so did opportunity. Our ancestors learned to hunt with cunning as well as strength. They used sharpened stones to shape wooden spears. They learned to work together, surrounding prey with silent coordination. A single spark of communication, a gesture, a glance, carried meaning. The seeds of language were being sown. Imagine them, 10 or 12 figures moving through morning mist. The air smells of wet grass and animal musk. Their feet are bare against the soil. They crouch low, patient, watching a herd of gazelle at the edge of a clearing. One signals with a nod. The others fan out, their movements fluid, almost choreographed. It is a dance older than speech, the choreography of survival. When the hunt was done, they gathered around the fallen animal. They used their tools to divide the meat, sharing it among the clan. They left offerings to the scavengers, to the vultures and hyenas who waited nearby. Perhaps even then a sense of respect was forming, the understanding that life feeds life, and that the earth must always be given something in return. The sharing of food, the building of shelter, the tending of fire. These were not just acts of necessity, they were rituals of connection. Through them, bonds deepened, and through those bonds, the first glimmerings of empathy began to shine. Fire, the miracle of warmth and light, became the heart of every camp. It is uncertain when exactly humans first tamed it, perhaps around 1 million years ago, perhaps later. But by this time, those who survived the great bottleneck had likely learned its secret. They carried embers from place to place, protecting them as though they were children. Fire meant life, heat against the cold, protection against the dark. It transformed food, softened roots and meat, and in doing so, changed their bodies. Smaller jaws, lighter bones, more energy for the brain. The flicker of flame became the first hearth, the center of every gathering, the pulse of every night. Around it they began to share, not just food but stories, not words perhaps, but gestures, mimicry, laughter. The first performances in the theater of humankind. Through generations, they moved across landscapes that today exist only in fossils and dreams. They crossed river deltas that would later vanish, mountains that would erode into sand. Their footprints, pressed into volcanic ash, hardened into stone, and remained. Silent signatures left for distant descendants to find. It was through these small acts of endurance that evolution worked its slow magic. Brains grew larger, hands grew more precise, throats and tongues adapted for complex sound, and deep within, a new kind of awareness began to bloom, the awareness of self. When the ice returned again, as it always did, they were better prepared. They had memory, they had fire, they had each other. The rhythm of life in those days was not measured in years, but in migrations. They followed the rains, the herds, the turning of stars. They slept beneath open skies and listened to the far-off howls of predators. At night, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a trail of fire. And perhaps as they stared into it, they felt something stir, wonder, the first inkling that they were part of something vast. That wonder, too, became an inheritance. It lingers still in the gaze of a child staring at the stars, in the hush that falls when we look at the sea and feel both small and infinite. Over thousands of generations, some of these people moved northward, following coastlines into Arabia, Asia, and beyond. Others remained in Africa, where new forms of humanity would later arise. Homo naledi, Homo rhodesiensis, and at last Homo sapiens. But all of them, every branch of that ancient tree, carried within their blood the memory of survival, the echo of the bottleneck that nearly ended everything. Life, once reduced to a whisper, was singing again. The world itself was alive with renewal. Forests growing in the wake of ice, new species evolving in the warmth. The earth, ever the patient teacher, had shown that even catastrophe could be fertile ground. With time, the survivors began to alter the world in small but lasting ways. They shaped stones into tools that fit perfectly into their hands. The Acheulean hand axe, smooth and balanced, beautiful in its simplicity. Each one took hours to make, chipped and turned, until it gleamed with intention. To hold one today is to feel a pulse through stone. The quiet intelligence of a mind long gone, yet not so different from our own. The making of tools was more than craft, it was foresight, the first expression of imagination. It meant thinking not just of now, but of later. It meant understanding that the future could be shaped by what one did today. And in that understanding lay the roots of all human creation. Even their social worlds evolved. As groups grew, they began to divide tasks: hunters, gatherers, caretakers, toolmakers. The beginnings of cooperation, of shared purpose. They learned that no one could survive alone for long. In unity, there was life. Through all these quiet revolutions, fire, memory, cooperation, humanity's form began to stabilize. Their faces softened, their foreheads grew taller, their hands more capable. Their hearts, too, grew larger, not in size, but in capacity. They mourned their dead, they cared for the injured, they shared. Even in the harshness of the Pleistocene, tenderness bloomed. Imagine yourself among them now. You sit beside a river, its surface silver in the light of dawn. Mist curls above the water and the air smells of wet earth and smoke. Beside you others stir. Your family, your group, your world. There are no walls, no machines, no cities. Only sky and soil. Only breath and heartbeat. A life stripped bare of ornament, but rich with belonging. You drink from the river, feel the cold slide down your throat. You hear the low murmur of voices, the crackle of embers. Somewhere a child laughs, a sound pure and bright against the morning hush. In that sound is the entire promise of the future. Time passes. Generations become ages. The earth shifts again, slow and inexorable. New glaciers form, old forests fade. The line of humanity branches, adapts, evolves. And through it all, the ancient spark continues to burn. That quiet defiance against the dark. It was this spark, the instinct not only to survive but to imagine, that would one day lift us from the plains to the stars. But for now, it was enough simply to live, to breathe, to endure. The story of evolution is not one of triumph, but of patience. Each change took thousands of lifetimes. Each step forward was paid for with countless struggles unseen by history. Every gesture, every learned skill, every moment of connection built the foundation of who we are. And though the earth changed again and again, through drought and flood, through warmth and ice, the descendants of those few who survived the bottleneck continued onward. They would wander across continents, adapting to every challenge. They would give rise to Neanderthals and Denisovans, to early Homo sapiens, the bearers of a new kind of fire, the fire of thought. Life, having nearly vanished, had learned to listen more closely to itself. In the hush of deep time, it found new ways to grow, to think, to love. And the earth, as if proud of its fragile children, gave them more to see and need, more color in the skies, more warmth in the soil, more song in the wind. The bottleneck had not been an ending, it was a beginning in disguise. Through that narrow gate, humanity was reshaped, made more aware, more adaptable, more attuned to the delicate rhythm of existence. From almost nothing, everything we know began. Time moved on, not in years, but in breaths of stone and seasons of ice. The earth, ever ancient and ever new, turned once more toward cold. The warmth that had nourished the plains began to fade again. Mountains of ice crept southward. Oceans drew back from their shores. The green world dulled, and a grayness fell upon the land. To the beings who had survived the last great winter, this was a familiar song, the rhythm of loss and renewal repeating through ages. But this time, something was different. The minds that now walked the earth were sharper, more observant, more aware. They could sense change before it came. They could plan, they could prepare, but they could not stop the will of the planet. The Pleistocene Ice Age returned like a long, slow sigh. It did not crash down suddenly, but crept, year after year, across the horizon. Rain dwindled. The rivers that had carried life began to shrink into mud and memory. Trees fell back, replaced by scrub and dust. Animals grew leaner, herds wandered farther, and with them went the early humans, ever following, ever searching for what could no longer be found. This was the second great test, a trial not of strength, but of endurance, of adaptation. It was during this long age of change that evolution's hand shaped the next form of humankind, the birth of Homo sapiens from the deep lineage of survivors. The earth demanded transformation, and life obeyed. Brains grew yet larger, skulls rounder, faces finer. The tools of stone became more precise, more elegant. Flakes struck with intention, edges perfect as thought. But progress came hand in hand with loss. Every innovation was a whisper against the wind of extinction. Every generation, a fragile bridge over the chasm of time. The cold did not come evenly. Some lands froze, others burned with drought. In Africa, cycles of aridity and wetness came and went with merciless rhythm. Lakes appeared, then vanished. Forests gave way to desert, then bloomed again centuries later. Each fluctuation scattered families, reshaped migrations, and split one people into many. Those who found water became the ancestors of tomorrow. Those who did not faded into dust. It is here, in these shifting climates, that humanity's creativity was born. Necessity, the mother of invention, whispered to every mind that survived. They learned to dig for roots when trees bore no fruit. They learned to track animals across the hard ground by shadow and scent alone. They began to store food, to remember the seasons, to travel with purpose rather than chance. The struggle became ritual, a pattern of leaving and returning, of following the tides of life wherever they led. And through that rhythm, a quiet wisdom took root, that the earth was not an enemy to be conquered, but a teacher to be understood. But understanding did not guarantee peace. The world was vast, and danger lived in every shadow. Predators still prowled. Lightning still split the horizon. Volcanoes still trembled beneath the crust, reminding all who walked above that the ground itself could betray them. It was during one of these ages, perhaps around 800,000 years ago, that fire became a constant companion, no longer borrowed from lightning, but kindled by human hands. That mastery changed everything. Fire meant control over the dark, over hunger, over fear. But it also meant responsibility. The first bargain with nature. For every flame lit, a tree was burned. For every meal cooked, a piece of the forest was given. And so began humanity's long conversation with the world. The push and pull between creation and consumption. By this time, the small bands of survivors had spread far beyond the valleys of Africa. Some reached into the Middle East, into Asia, into the ancient forests of Europe. Each region sculpted its own kind of human. Neanderthals in the cold north, Denisovans in the high plateaus, and still within Africa, the early form of us. Different faces, different shapes, but one enduring story. Each carried the same ancestral flame, the same memory of near extinction. The conflict, if it can be called that, was not between species, but between existence and the void. Every storm, every drought, every failing harvest asked the same question: will you endure? And for hundreds of thousands of years, the answer, whispered through each breath, was yes. But endurance comes with change. The earth's shifting moods force the mind to stretch. The line between instinct and imagination grew thin. Where once survival meant only motion, the pursuit of herds, the following of rain, now it began to mean creation. They shaped the world to suit their needs. They made shelters from stone and bone. They learned to weave grasses, to dig pits for water, to carve marks into wood that might hold meaning. It was the beginning of memory outside the mind, the first traces of culture. The struggle gave birth to thought, and thought in time gave birth to art. Perhaps somewhere in a cave, one of our ancestors ran their hand along the wall, feeling the cool texture of limestone beneath their palm. Perhaps they took a piece of charcoal from the fire and drew a shape. an animal, a handprint, a spiral, a message to no one, to everyone, to the future. In that gesture, the line between survival and expression blurred. To create was to endure. To mark the world was to say, I was here. And yet, even as the spark of humanity grew brighter, darkness lingered on the horizon. The cycles of the planet were unrelenting. A new glaciation loomed. Rivers froze. Seas retreated once more, and vast stretches of land fell silent. The Neanderthals thrived in the cold, their bodies sturdy, their tools refined. But others, those delicate, upright dreamers in Africa, faced a different kind of trial. The environment turned harsh again. Drought swept across the continent, and once more, numbers dwindled. But this time, something subtle shifted within the human spirit. Instead of waiting for change, they began to move toward it. They became nomads of survival, travelers not just of land but of time. Wherever the earth grew barren, they adapted. Wherever resources failed, they learned to invent. The brain, already large, began to fill with possibility. The first sparks of symbolic thought, language, art, story, flickered in the darkness. And so the turning point arrived quietly. From the chaos of the Earth's shifting climate, consciousness emerged. Not all at once, but like dawn through fog. Our ancestors who had once simply been began to know. They began to see themselves as part of the pattern. Creatures of flesh and bone, yes, but also of thought and dream. It was a revolution without noise, a transformation without war. The mind itself became the tool of survival. They began to look ahead, to store food not for days but for seasons, to teach their young not only how to live but how to imagine. The rhythm of survival became the rhythm of story, the first thread of what would become culture, civilization, history. But the earth, ever impartial, cared nothing for thought or art. She continued her slow dance of warmth and ice. She erased and renewed, carved and reshaped. Whole valleys filled with silt, whole forests vanished. And always the question remained, can you endure again? They could, they always did. And each time they endured, they became something more. Through suffering came strength. Through loss came innovation. Through isolation came connection. For even as the climate divided them, even as mountains and deserts separated clans, the longing for belonging drew them together again and again. Migration became the lifeblood of our species. The earth was vast, but humanity, still fragile, still few, carried the same memory, the same pulse, the same desire for warmth, for firelight, for each other. Thus, the conflict of this age was not destruction but transformation. It was the forging of identity, the shaping of humanity by hardship. In every loss, a lesson. In every silence, a song waiting to be sung. And though we call it conflict, the earth herself did not rage. She merely changed, as she always has, as she always will. It is we who learned to hear change as a storm, when in truth it is simply the music of time. And so, as the millennia turned, the great ice began once again to withdraw. The survivors stepped into a new world, older, wiser, shaped by eons of testing. They carried within them everything the earth had taught: patience, imagination, tenderness, fire. They did not know it, but the hardest trial was behind them. The near extinction, the long silence, the cold, all of it had prepared them for what would come next. From the quiet heart of struggle, a new kind of human would rise, Homo sapiens. The thinker, the dreamer, the builder of futures. The world had demanded transformation, and humanity had answered. At last, after hundreds of thousands of years of cold and silence, the earth began to breathe warmth once more. The glaciers loosened their ancient grip. Ice melted into rivers that sang through the valleys, carving new paths through the stone. The forests returned, slow and green. The plains bloomed with wildflowers, and the air, long still and thin, grew sweet again. And from the scattered survivors, from those who had walked the edge of extinction and endured, life rose, renewed. In Africa, where it had all begun, a new dawn shimmered across the horizon. The sun poured light over the highlands and the deep rift valleys, over the bones of ancient ancestors buried in the soil. Among the acacia trees and riverbanks, small bands of people stood and looked out over the land. Their faces were different now, softer, more familiar. Their eyes, wide and dark, carried the reflections of both memory and wonder. They were us, Homo sapiens. The old species had faded into time's gentle shadow. Homo erectus, heidelbergensis, naledi, ergaster, each a verse in the long song of becoming. But now from the same ancient root that had survived the great bottleneck, the new form of humanity emerged. Their minds were clear, their hands deft, their hearts full of curiosity. They were not stronger than those who came before, only more aware. And in that awareness lay their power. They looked to the stars, not with fear but with fascination. They followed rivers to their sources, seas to their horizons. They shaped stone into tools so fine they could cut a hair's breadth. They painted caves with the stories of their hunts, their dreams, their gods of wind and flame. And through those paintings, the silence of a million years was broken. On the walls of places we now call Lascaux and Chauvet, thousands of years later, their descendants would draw herds of bison and running horses. They would leave the outline of their hands and pressed in ochre against rock, Joe, as if to say, we endured. Those simple marks were a declaration of presence, a defiance of the void. Each handprint a whisper from the ancient few who refused to vanish. They remembered, even without knowing how, the long shadow of near extinction. In every story told by the fire, in every ritual, every carving and song, there was the same quiet thread. We are alive. We are still here. The earth, too, seemed to remember. The new climate stabilized, warm and generous. Grasses spread across the plains, rivers teemed with life, and the air filled once again with birdsong. It was as if the planet herself had opened her arms to the fragile beings who had passed her test. With time, the people grew in number. They spread across Africa, then beyond it, into the Levant, into Asia, into the cold valleys of Europe. They crossed land bridges, now lost beneath the sea. Everywhere they went, they carried the same inheritance: fire, language, imagination. They built shelters not just for bodies, but for dreams. They looked at the sky and saw meaning. They looked at one another and saw reflection. It is a miracle so ordinary we forget to see it. That every face you pass, every heartbeat you hear, descends from that single thread. The few who endured when the world nearly ended. Imagine them now, standing at the edge of a new world. They do not know they have begun something vast. They do not know that one day their descendants will build cities and send their voices into the stars. They only know the warmth of the sun, the taste of fruit, the smell of rain after drought. They know that they are alive, and that knowing is everything. Across generations, their story unfolds, slow, organic, unbroken. The child learns to speak, the mother teaches, the elder remembers. Through voice and gesture, wisdom passes like fire from one to the next. Memory becomes language, language becomes myth, and myth becomes the architecture of the human soul. They began to bury their dead tenderly with tokens of stone and shell. They began to dream of afterlives, of ancestors watching from beyond. They began to measure time not just by the sun but by the stars, to see patterns in the heavens, to wonder why they returned. In their wonder, they found reverence. In their reverence, meaning. Through this gentle awakening, the species that once teetered on the edge of nothingness became custodians of the earth. They shaped the land not out of domination but gratitude. Each fire they lit was a quiet offering to the memory of those who had endured the cold. Each story told was a bridge to the ones who came before. And so the cycle completed itself. From silence came survival, from survival awareness, from awareness creation. The bottleneck, that dark narrowing of life, had not been a punishment, it was transformation. Through it, the species learned humility, resilience, and connection. It became capable not just of living, but of loving, of holding the world with gentleness, of seeing itself as part of something eternal. This is the quiet truth of evolution, that growth is born from struggle and beauty from endurance. The very fragility of our beginnings is what made us strong. The near death of our kind gave birth to empathy, the knowledge that every life, no matter how small, is precious. The ice ages would come and go many times more. Civilizations would rise and fall. Empires would bloom like flowers and crumble like sand. But that ancient memory, the whisper of survival, the ache of continuity, would remain. It lives still, in every heartbeat, in every act of hope. Each time we light a fire, each time we tell a story, we reenact what they began. We keep the darkness at bay not with walls but with words. We turn the unknown into beauty, the silence into song. And as night falls again, as stars begin to bloom across the sky, the same ancient light that watched over them now watches over us. The constellations they saw have barely shifted. The moon that guided their journeys still drifts through her silver phases. The universe, immense and indifferent, holds us in the same soft gaze. How strange, how humbling, that all we are, every language, every thought, every dream, began with those few who refused to vanish 900,000 years ago. That their endurance became our imagination, that their silence became our song. And now, as the earth turns once more toward stillness, the story finds its calm. Life, reborn from the narrowest of chances, has learned to flourish. The long winter has passed. The dawn has come again. The lesson of that distant age is simple and endless. That existence itself is fragile and therefore sacred. That to survive is not to conquer, but to remember. That from almost nothing, wonder can arise. And so the earth rests, breathing slowly, her children grown and scattered, still bound to her heartbeat. In every breeze that touches your skin, in every pulse that echoes in your chest, the story continues. The ones who lived are still living through you. Before sleep, there is always a return, a quiet circling back to where everything began. And so we return, not to the beginning of the story, but to the beginning of life itself. The earth still turns beneath the same sky. The continents still drift in their endless waltz. The seas still breathe, the mountains still dream. And we, their children, still listen. Our hearts attuned to the same rhythm that beat within the first of us, long before names, long before memory. The world, now quiet, hums with continuity. The air you breathe tonight is the same air that touched the faces of those ancient survivors. Each breath is a shared remembrance, a whisper passed from lungs 900,000 years old, through forests and storms and time, into you. You are the continuation of that fragile thread, the living proof that even when life narrows to almost nothing, it can still expand again into wonder. Close your eyes. Imagine that thread glimmering through time, a silver line weaving through darkness, through ice and storm, through extinction and rebirth. It stretches from the first fire to the stars above you now. It hums quietly beneath everything you are. Each heartbeat echoes the rhythm of that survival. Each breath carries the patience of those who waited through cold and silence. You are not separate from them. You are their dream made real. In the stillness of this moment, you can feel the weight of time soften. All the centuries collapse into a single gentle now. There is no hurry here, no struggle, only the slow exhale of the universe continuing itself. The atoms in your hands once drifted through stars. The water in your veins once flowed through ancient rivers. You are, in truth, the memory of the earth-given form, a brief note in her eternal song. And just as she has done for billions of years, the earth keeps her rhythm. Day folds into night, winter into spring, silence into sound, and sound into silence again. Let it fall now, this quiet rain. Each drop a whisper of continuity, each sound a reminder that all things change and all things endure. The people who survived the great bottleneck did not know you would come. They did not know there would be music or writing or light carved from glass. But they knew something deeper, that life must be protected, tended like a fire in the wind, that as long as one flame remains, the dark can never fully return. You are that flame. You are the warmth that carried through a million nights. You are the echo of their breath, the light of their endurance. Imagine now the fire at the center of an ancient camp. The air is cool. The stars are sharp above. Figures sit around the glow wrapped in furs, their faces silvered by moonlight. The flames shift and whisper, painting stories on the walls of their shelter. They are tired but peaceful. The long hunt is over. The world is vast and silent around them. You are sitting there too, your breath mingling with theirs, your heartbeat joined to their slow rhythm. In this circle of light, time folds. The ancient and the modern become one. Their survival becomes your serenity. Their quiet strength becomes your rest. Listen. The wind moves gently across the plain. It has done so for ages. It carries the scent of earth and rain, of beginnings and endings. It carries stories, not in words, but in rhythm. Every gust, every sigh is the voice of history continuing. And as you listen, your own breath begins to match it. Slower now, softer, deeper. The body remembers what the mind forgets. That rest is part of survival. That stillness is not absence, but belonging. In this stillness, you are everything. You are the survivor and the dream. You are the ancient hunter waiting for dawn, and the stargazer tracing constellations through memory. You are the fire and the darkness, the silence and the song. Sleep is not a departure, but a return, a small echo of the earth's own resting. Each night the world invites you back into her arms. She gathers you close as she once gathered the first of us when the cold came down. She reminds you, you are safe, you are home. The rain becomes softer, almost distant now. The rhythm of it blends with your breath. Thoughts drift like clouds, heavy at first, then lighter, dissolving into still air. What was question becomes quiet. What was story becomes dream. The boundaries of self begin to loosen, melting into the wide calm of the earth itself. And the narrator of time, that quiet voice within all things, continues its whisper. You were never alone. The hands that once built, the first fires are your hands. The eyes that watched the stars for the first time are your eyes. The same sky that carried their hope now shelters yours. The world hums softly in its sleep, softly in its forests murmur, mountains exhale mist, rivers move through the dark with the patience of eternity, and somewhere, beneath all of it, the deep core of the planet beats, a pulse older than thought, steady, unending. You're part of that pulse. You have always been. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them, the voices of the few who survived, the ancestors who endured the long cold. They speak without words, their message carried in warmth and wind. Live softly. Endure kindly. Remember what we learned in the dark, that even the smallest flame is enough. The message settles deep, beneath thought, beneath dreaming, until it becomes part of your breathing. And now the tide moves closer, its rhythm long and hypnotic. In and out, each wave erasing the lines of the day, leaving only calm behind. In and out. You are floating now, between waking and sleeping, between the memory of what was and the promise of what continues. The stars shimmer above, their light older than every human story. Perhaps one of them was shining the night those few survivors looked up, wondering if morning would ever come. And now you look at the same light, and it answers, it always comes. Sleep now, as the world once slept through its long winters. Let your thoughts drift into the deep. There is no danger here, only the endless turning of time, the gentle hand of the earth upon your brow. You are the dream of every ancestor who ever reached for warmth. You are the continuation of every heartbeat that refused to stop. You are the quiet proof that life always finds its way. And as the stars wheel slowly through the night, their ancient light brushing the horizon, you too drift, beyond thought, beyond story, into the silence that began it all. Rest, child of time. Rest, survivor of 1,000 ages. Rest and remember. The world has ended 1,000 times and still it is beautiful. And now, as the stars return to the same skies that watched them millions of years ago, we too close our eyes. Another moment in an endless story. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. The world turns softly beneath you. The fire still burns. And life goes on.